Happy New Year's, Blue Jays fans. Looks like 2022 is shaping up to be a Blue Jays year, and I'm enjoying the view so far from the On Fek Circle, brought to you by JFtC and a family of shows that are produced by JFtC and that were spawned from the cradle of podcast civilization, which is the Jason from the Couch radio podcast, hosted by our senior editor and founder, Sean Doyle. Joining me here on the YouTube channel, and of course, you can get the podcast here on the YouTube channel, as well as at the Jason from the Couch Facebook page. You can follow it along on Twitter, and you can always go back anytime. If you can't watch the shows live, you can always go back and check out Spotify or Stitcher or Google or Apple, wherever the finer podcasts are available. The Jason from the Couch radio podcast is available. But joining me here as a YouTube exclusive show, if you will, though you can also pick it up on Facebook and the Twitter feed during the live performance, is Sunny Side of the Dome, and that is hosted by my colleague Karen Suter. That is Thursdays, 6 p.m. Eastern time. If you're looking for the live, but all of her shows are archived on the Jason from the Couch YouTube channel, as are all the On Fek Circles. I generally am here Tuesdays, 6 p.m. Eastern time. And the podcast, by the way, live one was last night, but every Monday, 6 p.m. Eastern time. I guess it would be helpful to tell you when the shows are on, just rather than saying, hey, it's a show. If there isn't like a podcast TV guide saying, oh, tonight, hey, that's the On Fek Circle. That's great. Doesn't work that way. But I am the madman across the border, the feckless wonder, Steve Fek. Thanks for tuning in for another episode of the On Fek Circle. I made a resolution for 2022 involving this show. I really want to aim to get more audience involvement. And if you're watching, the stream live now, you can, whether it be on YouTube or Facebook or on Twitter, you can put up your questions. And we try to get as many on the air. We can't get every comment or question, up on the screen and on the air, especially for somebody old like me who's easily distracted and forgets, where he is and all. We can't have too much clutter up there, but behind the scene, we'll get those questions up when we can. I want this to be a conversation, and I want it to be a season-long conversation. Yes, we're in a lockout now, but it's going to get resolved. We're going to have spring training, maybe not a complete spring training, but we're going to have spring training. And if you think about it, really, the minor leaguers that aren't on the 40-man roster, they can play exhibition games for that first week or so. That might actually be a cool thing for us to actually get to see some of the names that, we talk about here or write about at Jays from the Couch. Our Ryan Mueller did a terrific season-long series about minor leaguers. He's ideally going to join the podcast here very, very soon. And it's great to put faces and abilities and actions with names and rankings that you generally would see at various deals. So I'm going to try to avoid the best I can this being an editorial kind of a program. I think sometimes I slip into that and I don't mean to. Sometimes it can be funny, like when I call Ross Atkins a rodeo clown, or, I question, something that, is wrong, but general polite society will generally say, well, yeah, but we shouldn't say anything. So, I'm going to try to be not a kinder, gentler feckless wonder, but I want this to be more of a weekly event for you folks out there. So the lockout makes it easier. I'm really going to focus a lot on Blue Jays history, unique takes perhaps, or even just unique events or forgotten events in Blue Jays history. So you can look forward to that going forward. But for tonight, I want you to, and if you are watching, please put Put your questions out there. Or after the fact, I do go back and I will look for questions and I will look for comments, even if they're not positive. I will try to respond to them the best I can and try to get a conversation going. Tonight, I'm going to talk about who the Blue Jays legacy player is. Not the best player, not who are the Blue Jays legends or who are the Blue Jays Mount Rushmore. I mean, that's an interesting conversation, and maybe we can have that conversation, later in the year. But I want to talk about it from a legacy standpoint. And what triggered this idea is, I live in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. And I know it probably sounds odd for someone from Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania to be doing a show and writing for a Blue Jay site. But I mean, I've been a Blue Jays fan since 1979. More diehard 83 after Yaz retired. But really, I follow as far as day in, day out, following the team, rooting, going to games, traveling to spring training from 79 on. It's been the Blue Jays for me as far as an American League team goes. So 49 years ago, this past New Year's Eve, Roberto Clemente perished in a plane crash with him trying to fly much-needed supplies to earthquake victims in Nicaragua. I'm sure all of you know that story. But it dawned on me that you see all kind of rankings, favorite Blue Jay players, best Blue Jays players, worst trades, best trades. We go through it here, at Jays from the Couch, on other sites, at MLB.com. You always have those type of articles. But I don't know that the discussion about who a Blue Jays legacy person, like you should limit it to just a player, but really, we're talking about a baseball team, so it really should be focused on a player. Who is that legacy player for the Blue Jays? Now, our senior editor and I had conversations, Sean Doyle, about, don't try to compare anybody in the Blue Jays to Roberto Clemente or Jackie Robinson. Oh, and I agree. I mean, you can't do that. I mean that there are people that make a difference and make an impact, and then there are Roberto Clementes and Jackie Robinsons. And I should add to the Jackie Robinson, Larry Doby, who was the first African-American American League player. And his story is often overlooked because he wasn't the first. But not only did he grow up in one of the most racist cities in the northeast part of the United States, if not all of the United States, Paterson, New Jersey. So he's already used to racism and unfair treatment from police or whatever it is. Yes, Jackie Robinson got abuse. I guarantee you, Larry Doby, who is much more reserved and much more quiet as an individual than Jackie Robinson is, I guarantee you he got equally as much abuse from racist fans or fans that just didn't understand or couldn't have their foundation shaken and tradition shaken. He was playing in Boston. The last major league team to integrate was the Boston Red Sox. He played in Philadelphia A's. They weren't always in Oakland. They were in Kansas City, but they originated in Philadelphia. They were very, very slow to integrate. And they've had their share of racial issues, there. So, Larry Doby went through the same thing Jackie Robinson did. But I digress. We're not talking about Larry Doby and Jackie Robinson at this point. But still, there have been Blue Jays that have made major impacts on the baseball landscape in Canada and even in MLB. But really, who is the person that best personifies the Blue Jays and baseball in Canada? Now, it would be easy to go to guys like Dave Mckay, who I believe was the first Canadian. He was an original Blue Jay. I think he was the first Canadian Toronto Blue Jay. But he played what, 2 or 3 years here. He played for the A's for a while. Pretty nondescript career. He still made it, which is great. You had the Butler brothers. Rich and Rob. You had Rod Ducey. Certainly had Russell Martin, who is one of the greatest Canadian baseball players of all time. He's not a Hall of Fame player, but Russell Martin was a terrific catcher, terrific athlete. I got a chance to watch him here in Pittsburgh for 2 seasons. Certainly, Blue Jay fans loved it when he signed that contract in Toronto, even though it was toward the end of his career. He was a terrific player. So you could say, well, yeah, he's a Canadian, and he was a Blue Jay, so maybe. No, not really. Great player, great memories. Doesn't really have a legacy as it ties into the Blue Jays. You could look at Paul Beeston, the Canadian certified accountant made good. He was the first employee of the Toronto Blue Jays outside of ownership or whatever. He was the first employee. He was in charge of business operations. He was the first employee in Blue Jays history. He later became team president during the glory years, 89 through, let's say, 90. I think he left in 97. And then, he was an operations executive for Major League Baseball for a very long time before he finished out his career and was replaced by Mark Shapiro when he retired. So you certainly could point to Paul Beeston because that's a legacy of, it's almost more of a legacy of what he belonged to or where he was from. Sort of like, a fraternity, if you will. There are legacies. If you had an older brother or older sister that was in a fraternity, they call you a legacy because you are their brother or sister. And generally you have a much easier time, getting into that fraternity. So Paul Beeston would be more of a fraternity kind of legacy, though certainly a great baseball executive. He did wonderful things with Major League Baseball. He truly did. But really, let's talk about on the field. And your thoughts are going to drift to some like major stars. Roberto Alamar, for example. And let's put aside what it has been found that he did. He's been punished for that. He's been taken off the level of excellence. He was fired by the Blue Jays, fired by MLB. Put that aside for a second, because obviously that now makes him ineligible really to be a legacy player. But if you look at it, just what he did up until those, and there was a series of mistakes that he had made as far as domestic abuse and other issues. He's the first and only player in the Hall of Fame with a Blue Jays cap, with the Blue Jays logo on his plaque. Roy Halladay's family, who we'll talk about in a little bit, decided not to choose between the Jays and the Phillies when he was inducted posthumously to the Hall of Fame. So Alamar is still the only Blue Jay in the Hall of Fame as far as the logo goes. There's guys that have played for them, the Molitor and Winfield, but there's no Blue Jay logo on their plaque. He was very instrumental when he was working for the Blue Jays after his career. He oversaw and kind of was the face and ambassador for the Tournament 12, which was held every year at Rogers Center, and that really spotlighted amateur Canadian talent. And some of the names that came out of that played in that tournament and were mentored by Alamar through there would be Mike Soroka, Josh Naylor, I believe, played in that tournament, and the Mariners' new third baseman, Abraham Toro, was part of that Tournament 12 and part of that development program. So Alamar, that you could say he was a great player. He was an exciting player. For all intents and purposes, he was a jerk. But if you used that, then you would have you'd be getting a lot of people out of the Hall of Fame if you were basing it on a simple jerkiness. I'm cleaning that language up because there's much stronger words I would rather use when describing Robbie Alamar. And the guy that came over from San Diego in the same trade, Joe Carter. In fact, Joe Carter was selected by fan vote as, what did they call that? Hometown hero. Back in 2006, they had this vote, and he was selected as the Blue Jays' hometown hero. He represented the legacy of the Blue Jays, according to a fan vote. Everybody remembers what he did in 1993, winning the World Series, the walk-off home run. Only he and Mazeroski have done that. But he was involved in 4 last out, last play games for the Jays that involved them having some kind of a championship. And he drove in the winning run. I think in fact, he might have even been driven in Robbie Alamar, if I remember right, with a single to clinch the 1991 AL East Division Championship. In 92, playing first base, he caught the last out of the World Series. He also caught the last out as an outfielder of the 93 ALCS. Of course, he had the walk-off. He was an analyst for 2 years. He was involved in community service and charitable organizations while he was here. He still co-chairs, an annual golf tournament, which I guess eventually will be played again if COVID ever gets under control everywhere. So he certainly, just from those, details of his career, could be considered a Blue Jays legacy player. Didn't come up in the system. He was a Cub, then he was an Indian. He did drive in 100 runs 10 times, including the shortened strike year. Playing only 115 games, he drove in 100 runs. So, I mean, he was a terrific, terrific player. Not a Blue Jays legacy player. The late Roy Halliday, who I referred to earlier, came up through the system, had his struggles, went back down to single A after struggling at the major league level, worked his way back. He had a manager, Buck Martinez, believe it or not, that really kind of worked with him and built his confidence up. He's in the Hall of Fame. Halliday was very involved, especially in charities that involved either sick children or underprivileged children. He had Doc's Box that they renovated and geared it to kids that he and his wife would host kids in that box for Blue Jays home games throughout his career. When he signed that big extension, he made sure that $100,000 a year was targeted for the Jays Care Foundation. You can be argued that perhaps his better years or most impactful years were in Philadelphia. And I know many of you are going to disagree with that, and that's okay. As we're talking here, again, let me encourage you, put up your questions. If you're watching this as a replay or based on your schedule, you couldn't watch the live things, post your questions, comments, disagreements, complaints. I will respond to them. I want this to be a conversation. 2022 is a conversation between Jays from the Couch and Blue Jays fans. This show, the On Fek Circle, and Blue Jays fans. Same thing with Karen's show, Sunny Side of the Dome. So don't be shy. We want to have that conversation with you. Tony Fernandez. I really, when I first thought of this, he was the first guy that popped in my mind, believe it or not. The Tony Fernandez Foundation, both while he was a player, but even after the fact, very active in trying to support, develop education and youth programs here in Canada, in the United States, and back in his native Dominican Republic. He was not an original Blue Jay from the expansion draft of 77, but signed as an international free agent in 1979. A fan, beloved by fans. He had 4 stints here in Toronto. And it seemed every time he came back, the cheers got louder and he was more beloved. So Tony Fernandez, yeah, okay, he certainly could be there. But my thoughts went away from him. And I mentioned earlier, we were talking about Roberto Clemente. Carlos Delgado from Puerto Rico, like Clemente. Clemente was his personal hero, not just baseball hero, his personal hero. And he took it upon himself to better the lives of people in his hometown and in his native Puerto Rico, just as Clemente did. And not just by giving money or appearing at children's hospitals or things like that. He was directly involved in exposing the education crisis in Puerto Rico. He was not afraid to step up and say, we've got to do better. This is wrong. The money's being mishandled. He was very vocal, and he put his time and his efforts into that. There is an island off the eastern shore of Puerto Rico called Vieques. Beautiful island. But the U.S. Navy, since Puerto Rico is a U.S. Commonwealth, I refuse to use the word protectorate, because if you follow the news, you've seen that the U.S. has neglected Puerto Rico, not only through the hurricanes and the more recent times, ever since it gained control of Puerto Rico. But they used to use sections of the island as bombing targets, both, airplanes literally dropping their bombs. They'd build targets to knock things out. And they would also have the warships, fire their guns and try to take out places on the island. He was very out front and vocal about that. And I have conflicting reports when I was doing some research that he may have even been arrested for one of the protests, but he certainly was there when there were mass arrests. If they didn't arrest him, he was out there in the media saying this must stop. And eventually in 2003, it did stop. He was also very devoted to peace initiatives. When he was playing, he was very vocal after 9/11, terrorist attacks of 9/11, of the war and subsequent occupations of both Iraq and Afghanistan. You may not remember, but Carlos would stay back in the dugout, very quiet. He wasn't disruptive. He was very quiet, tried to be as respectful as he could, but he would not come out on the field in American League ballparks when they played God Bless America during the 7th inning stretch. And he caught all kind of hell from Yankee fans in Boston. he was booed pretty regularly when he started to do that. He simply would not compromise his belief that, okay, yes, 9/11 was terrible, but we just can't, I can't stand by and allow this. I need to have my voice heard. So, yes, he had a lot of Clemente tendencies, but they were centered more on his native Puerto Rico. And there's nothing wrong with that. Just because he played for the Toronto Blue Jays does not mean that he should have taken all of his efforts and focused on what was going on in Canada. And he was, active in the community in Toronto and in Miami when he went to the Marlins and in New York when he played for the Mets. So again, I had to toss him aside. So then I thought of Buck Martinez. And I can already hear the moans and groans out there. You don't need to even put anything up about Buck. I hear them. Okay. I'm thousands of miles away from most of you, and I can hear you moaning and groaning. Buck Martinez, in so many ways, has been the face of the Blue Jays since being traded here from Kansas City, being part of that first division championship. He's been a broadcaster, a coach, a manager. When Buck Martinez speaks, people listen. They might get angry, but they listen. And Buck, who does have Native American heritage, he was actually educated in a First Nation school in California, in Northern California, when the terrible discovery and tragedy that happened at a First Nation school, Buck spoke out. He's very active in the Jays Care Foundation, which focuses on the underserved. And they do have a lot of sports and education programs for Aboriginal, First Nation children and communities. He's on the board of the baseball assistance team, which gives out grants to families and to players who have fallen upon hard times or have had medical emergencies or whatever the reason they're in trouble. He's been a big part of that. And I really, at first, thought it was going to be Buck Martinez, honestly. Tony Fernandez came up first, but I thought about it, Buck Martinez. I think to a degree it's been tainted because over the last several years, for whatever reason, people just hate him as a baseball announcer. Does he have malapropisms? Yes, he does. Does he have a hard time remembering what a player's name is? Yes, he does. He has been the voice of the Blue Jays ever since he came on board in Toronto. And in the U.S., on U.S. media outlets, which I know for Canadian listeners and viewers, they don't really care much about that. He is the person that he's the go-to guy. That's who they seek out for information about the Blue Jays. Dan Schulman to a lesser degree now, but Buck Martinez has always been the guy. But the Blue Jays' legacy player is Ernie Whitt. He was an original expansion pick. He played in that inaugural season of 1977. Took him a while to really get his traction, but he was the longest tenured of the original Blue Jays. He was in the organization from 1977 till 1989. Everybody else was gone by the time Ernie Whitt was traded to Atlanta. He's very active with the Canadian Cancer Society and Special Olympics when he was a player and then even in retirement. He was a coach for the Blue Jays for a couple of seasons. But he really is the ambassador of Canadian baseball. He has been the coach of Team Canada in some way, shape, or form, whether it be World Baseball Classic or the Pan American Games, where he has won 2 medals, a bronze and a gold. Olympics. He has been the manager of Team Canada since 1999. He's in the Ontario and the Canadian Baseball Hall of Fame. That is where his legacy is, because baseball will always be in the shadow of hockey in Canada. Doesn't mean the Canadian sport fans don't care about the Blue Jays, but I would venture to say in some areas, Winnipeg, Calgary, Edmonton, even though they've had minor league presence over the last 20, 30, 40 years, the Jays are probably even behind the CFL teams. They're behind the Blue Bombers, and I forgot what they call the Eskimos now. I know they don't call them the Eskimos anymore. And the Stampede. Okay. They're behind that. Baseball has its hot spots, I think, in Canada. I think British Columbia, Metro Vancouver, baseball has a big presence. Obviously in Ontario, Quebec, Montreal. Remember, they used to be an Expos. They were the first Canadian Major League franchise. And that legacy for the Blue Jays and for Blue Jays fans and for what Mark Shapiro and the team is trying to do as far as literally having a footprint that goes from Newfoundland in the Maritimes all the way across to British Columbia and the Yukon and Northwest Territories. He is the guy that has done all the grunt work and put all the foundation work in to develop baseball as a significant major presence in the nation of Canada. So what say you, Blue Jay fans? Please do, if you're watching this after the fact, post questions up on YouTube, on Facebook, on Twitter. I would love to keep this conversation going. We do not have to agree. We just need to agree to talk. And that's what I love to do. Thanks for tuning in for this episode. We'll be back in 2 weeks. Make sure you tune in on Thursday, Sunny Side of the Dome, Karen Suiters, 6 p.m. Eastern Time. And every Monday, a must-watch, listen, Jason from the Couch radio podcast. I'm the Feckless Wonder, Steve Fek. Thanks for sitting through this. Let's keep this conversation going, and we'll talk to you in 2 weeks.